Why, Dylan? Why? Oh, do you guys not want to watch the BBD podcast? I saw part of it and it seemed bad, and I guess I feel like torturing myself a little bit. If you want to subsidize my mental health care, you can go to DylanBurns.tv, DylanBurns.tv, donate, sub, support the channel. Your messages will be auto-read on stream. Or you can donate at DylanBurnsTV on Patreon. I tend to avoid them. I'm not a huge fan. I certainly wouldn't come to them for foreign policy analysis, because I don't think any of them work in foreign policy or have a history in it or anything like that. Like, I think some of them have history in business, but statecraft and business is very different, as we can see from the Trump administration. Not that he was particularly the best businessman either. Anyway, they've done a like nearly 20-minute segment, I think it's like 1850, that they released here on YouTube of their different guests here, including, I believe his name is Adam Sosnick, talking about the Ukraine-Israel-Taiwan aid deal and whether or not they should pass it. And this eventually becomes a we need to deal with the border before we deal with foreign aid thing for some of the guests, and some of the guests just don't want to send stuff, period. And I wanted to check this out because I just watched like a minute or two of it, of another streamer looking at it, and I was man, I was kind of blindsided a little bit. Let's check this out.
I asked a question.
Yep.
Do you support this bill? Do you support us continuously sending money their way, while many of these guys, this is their war. We're fighting their war and they're not paying the bill. We're paying the bill for NATO and Russian European allies to be protected. Why are we taking the debt for this? Do you support that?
Well, I mean, there's a few ways you can answer this question. The first way I'd answer it is that America made a commitment. We made a commitment in the 1990s with the Budapest memorandum, after we tried to make it clear to the Ukrainians, after they became an independent state, that if they did not give up the nuclear weapons, which was the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world at the time, we'd make them an international pariah. Now, there were some Ukrainians that wanted to keep the nuclear weapons, despite the fact that they'd be extremely expensive and it could, have diplomatic consequences, for the fact that they were fearful of a possible future infringement on their territory. So what the Ukrainian government tried to do is, if they were going to give up the third largest nuclear arsenal, the ultimate guarantor of state sovereignty, even if they knew that, maintaining it costs money and all these other things, they were giving this thing up. In return, they wanted some guarantor of state sovereignty. Now, I think when we look back at this, for some of us, we kind of oh yeah, that was silly of them. We don't realize how useful what Ukraine did in giving up those nuclear weapons was for us, and how much in the long run it has, in a way, kind of screwed them over. Even if they didn't need to keep the whole arsenal, they could have kept something, right? Or they could have attempted to keep something, even with the high costs, if they didn't know it was going to make them an international pariah. But for us, I mean, we have a Soviet Union collapsing, a gigantic nuclear arsenal, and we are getting them to move all these nukes to one place within Russia and move the missiles that carry those nukes, those warheads, making it so that that we don't have this huge disbursement of world-ending weapons. And so if a terrorist wanted to get their hands on it, it'd be more difficult. And with the deep corruption that was throughout the region, the idea of a corrupt official selling something to a terror group, I mean, I know it sounds like a movie, but these are things that they were thinking about after the end of the Cold War. And that was America's priority in Eastern Europe after the Soviet Union collapsed. It was the first thing we wanted to do, is find a way to deal with this imminent problem about these nuclear weapons that are left over in nation states like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and other post-Soviet states. And our ultimate decision was, let's get them to give them to the Russians. But in return for that, the Ukrainians wanted security guarantee, which then we and the Russians gave them. Now, we never concretely said what that meant, troops, anything like that, but we gave them the guarantee, and in response, they gave up their nuclear weapons. And so I think, number one, if we want to encourage nuclear nonproliferation, or at least stopping the expansion of nuclear weapons and nuclear armed states, which has been the goal of the United States and even the Soviets since the Kennedy and Brezhnev administrations. So it seems that we have a bipartisan consensus on this issue. Then Ukraine has dedicated themselves or helped that goal. That's one reason why. I would say, as when it comes to the Europeans, European stability is American stability, especially after the Second World War, as became more and more interdependent and intertied with the Europeans. As much as we talk about China and all these other markets, the Europeans are still our main export market. 45% of world GDP is concentrated within Europe and North America. So I think that we do have a direct economic incentive to try to encourage stability on that continent of consumers that are buying American products. I don't want the last few car plants in America to shut down. And if there are people buying them and we can sell that stuff over there, then I'm interested in selling that stuff over there. Man, those are just a few things. What are some other reasons I could throw out there? Man, you know what? I don't want to take too long. These are just two reasons. I could bring up issues of deterrence as well and American credibility on the world stage after we've dedicated ourselves to the Ukrainians. I think it's also moral. It's also within the bounds of international law. A lot of times if you're sending weapons to an aggressor state, that's illegal. But if you send weapons to a state that's getting invaded, the way we are intervening, quote unquote, is 100% within the morally prescribed boundaries of international law. We aren't violating any international law either. So like a lot of the constraints that were on previous American military action, which would have made me oppose things like, for example, the invasion of Iraq, or say would have made me oppose things like, I don't know, an intervention to invade Venezuela, for example, you know, the crazy cooped up plan that was talked about during the Trump administration, are just not here in this operation. Anyway, I think that's why it's within America's interest. So those are some of the many reasons why it's within our interests. As for the Europeans just approved $50 billion in multi-year aid to Ukraine. They've already collectively and bilaterally, they've approved more aid to Ukraine than the United States. Multi-year aid into the future, committing themselves way more into the future than we have from our aid packages. We don't have any aid packages up to 2027. They do. It's because they want Ukraine to integrate with Europe. And so there's EU aid, collective aid, and then there's bilateral aid between the different nation states. And if you combine all the value of all the aid, they have sent, I think, according to the Kiel Institute, as of like 6 or 7 months ago, like double what we have. And now they've approved another $50 billion and negotiating another $20 billion of military aid. Now, that's not to say that none of Europe could contribute more. I think the French could. I think the Italians could. I think the Spaniards could. I think there's many countries that could. I think that the big issue this year is going to be artillery production. The Europeans fell short when it came to their artillery export to the Ukrainians. They said they were going to be sending 1 million shells. They only ended up sending 500,000 by March of this year, which is when they said they'd send 1 million. Now their next goal is 1,000,001 shells, and they say they're going to produce 1.5 this year and then send 1.1 million of those to Ukraine. I guess the extra 100,000 is to make up for the 500,000 they missed. So yeah, there's areas where the Europeans need to improve, but they have taken more costs than us so far. That's not even to talk about the economic costs, because people are just talking about money spent. Because of European interdependence on the Russians, they had to take much more of an economic hit than we did for this geopolitical shift. Now, part of that, of course, is their fault for them becoming so reliant, especially the Germans, on Russian energy exports. But here's another way that I think these people would be interested. What energy are they consuming now in place of the Russian exports? Well, the Germans are getting Norwegian exports, yes, but also American LNG. We are massively expanding liquefied natural gas production in the United States, and we're going to export tons more. We already have 5 facilities built. We're going to build 5 to 6 more. We've already have, I think we're already producing 12 billion, was it, or 12 million? I think it was 12 billion cubic square feet of liquefied natural gas a day. And once these new facilities are built, it's going to be another 13. And then I think there's another like 16 contracted or like permitted already. And so we're already producing more than any other country in the world. But the more Europe becomes less reliant on Russian energy exports. As they're trying to find an alternative, many of them are going to turn to liquefied natural gas because compared to the other options that the Germans have, since they've shut down their nuclear power plants and they've shut down a lot of their coal plants, coal is the other option, restarting their old coal plants. Well, liquefied natural gas burns more effectively, it burns 50% less CO2 than coal does, and it takes less time to start up the process. I think coal, it takes like an hour, a lot less for liquefied natural gas. So this is something that's also going to benefit the United States economically, since I know this is a finance podcast. But of course, those are some selfish reasons involved there too. But that's also how nation states interact. Getting into the moral reasons, I think, is very clear. I've talked about the Ukrainian right to sovereignty, the different agreements that the Russians have violated. The Russians, like, going further and further after agreeing they wouldn't. I mean, a loss to American credibility is an issue that won't just affect us here, it'll affect us other places in the world. Anyway, I've been rambling too much. Let's see what they have to say. I also think it's relatively not that much money. And much of the stuff we've sent over is like the old Vietnam troop era carriers. It's not like we could have given those to the homeless or something. Like, they were just old carriers we had nothing else to do with. We certainly weren't going to put our own soldiers in those things, and we sent them over. What was it at? Like 0.3, 0.4% of GDP. That's how much we spent, 5% of Pentagon spending. And we've been holding up this aid package for 120 days. Yeah, I think we should send it.
There needs to be an understanding here that we can't just continue to have a blank check. But to say zero, I feel like minimalizes U.S.'s...
They say continue to have a blank check. What blank check has been issued? At every single point in this war, we have limited the amount of aid we've sent over, either in total amount or because of escalatory purposes. We still haven't sent over the longer range ATACMS. We sent it over like 20 ATACMS after the Zaporozhye counteroffensive had already happened. We limited the amount of Abrams. We've sent like 34 tanks. 34 Abrams. No, not even 34. I think it was 31. How many Abrams do we have? We have thousands upon thousands of thousands. Many of them just sitting in facilities, got nothing to do. We could easily send them hundreds more if we wanted. We haven't. Is it because of escalation? Is it because of the Biden administration wanting to get the most bang for their buck for what we send over? I don't know. And you'd have to ask the Biden administration. I think part of it is escalation management, but I think some people think we've sent over more than we actually have, especially relative to the other conflicts or aid packages we've sent over to other countries. I mean, if we compare this to like costs, for example, in Afghanistan and Iraq, relative to our strategic importance, like this is much more strategically important than Afghanistan. This is much more important to our interests and our stability than Afghanistan, and we've spent nothing even close to what we spent in Afghanistan with no American casualties. Just saying.
Power in the world as a global superpower. So what are the ripple effects of saying nothing? So we're just okay with Putin invading Ukraine and taking over Ukraine? Are we just okay with Xi invading Taiwan? Are we just okay with terrorism running rampant around the globe? Because if we don't do...
By the way, my main critique of the bill, even though sadly this is not how politics works in America, you should be able to vote on each of these things independently. The Taiwan aid, the Israel aid, and Ukraine aid. Somebody could determine, I support Taiwan and Ukraine aid, but I don't support Israel aid. Or this is for like Mike Johnson. He could determine he just supports Israel aid, maybe Taiwan aid, but doesn't support Ukraine aid, or maybe just Israel aid. Or somebody could determine, like, you could be like Josh Hawley, and well, Josh Hawley I think also supports Israel aid, but let's say you were somebody else who just believed Asia was I just support Taiwan. Israel doesn't matter, you know, Ukraine doesn't matter, just that. Or you vote against all of it. But I wish this was separated, like Mike Johnson indicated he was going to do at the start of his House leadership run, and Matt Gaetz said he was going to do and was pushing for him to do, and it was part of what he asked for in order to vote for Mike Johnson. But you know, that didn't happen. That fell apart quite quickly.
Anything, what happens? What happens? Look what's going on in the Middle East. If we step away, power vacuums are formed. And all of a sudden, our enemies that are running rampant around the world will step in and fill that vacuum.
So your fear is that if we don't do anything, Putin's going to get stronger. That's what your fear is.
I think doing nothing sends us...
I think the best... I mean, he's talking about credibility right here. I think a little bit like if we don't do anything here, then they're going to do stuff elsewhere. But he's not describing it in terms of credibility. He's just, but yeah, he's kind of pointing in that direction.
Signal to autocrats around the world that U.S. will do nothing when we do what we want to do.
So what are you going to do? What are you going to do when Russia went from spending 80% when it was trade dollars, using US dollars, to now down to 13%. And the transaction went from only 3% being won to now 30%. What are you going to do when we keep spending this money and printing the money, and then all of a sudden one day the dollar collapses, then you're being affected by the money? Are you now going to come back and say, I wish we wouldn't have sent all this money out there? Because the way this...
Okay, so the first thing is, a lot of the equipment we're sending is not money. We're not sending money. We're sending old gear that was in our storehouses for 60, 70 years. Some of this stuff is Vietnam era. Some of the equipment we're giving the Ukrainians is stuff that my grandfather probably rode in. That's crazy to think about. But that's the stuff that they're making do with and they're fighting this war with. So when we talk about like sending over this money, sending up stuff like that will have zero, and let me repeat that, zero effect on like our ending budget or debt. And I think people really overemphasize how much foreign aid is playing into our debt. The Trump tax cuts is playing much more into our debt, and Trump massively increasing our deficit during his administration to the possible worthlessness of future American dollars. I would not say that foreign aid, which makes about 1% of federal spending, even though Americans, when polled, think it's between 20 to 25% because it's scapegoat so much and it's talked about so much in the media and it's overemphasized, even though for the money that we spend, it does increase our influence on the world stage. It gives us more prominence on the world stage. It allows us to pursue what is important for us and important for our interests, both good and bad, on the world stage. But people like discount it as just worthless, like putting, like draining down money down the drain. But that's not true. A rebuilt Europe bought our products. When they bought our products, that built a working class in the United States, a middle class in the United States, a unionized middle class in the United States. The world is interconnected. The housing crisis did not just affect the United States. It affected the Chinese. It affected the Germans. It affected the French. It affected everyone. So yes, I do think that us spending money overseas, even for foreign endeavors, can be quite useful. As for the thing about currency, the Chinese yuan is not going to replace America as a world reserve currency. Neither is the ruble. The Russians want the ruble to be the world reserve currency, but the problem with the ruble being the world reserve currency is the ruble is constantly artificially manipulated. It's always, it's been artificially manipulated from the start of the war, and it's going to be artificially manipulated into the near future. And if you're trying to pick a world reserve currency that the world trusts, that the world looks at and says, I'm willing to get huge reserves of this because it's going to be worth something and I can use this to trade, having something that's artificially manipulated like that is not, well, going to be a good world reserve currency. The Chinese have a ton of political controls on their currency that I think they would probably be uncomfortable with, and they're not even trying to push the yuan as the world reserve currency. There is no competitor to the world reserve currency. You want to know what the next biggest competitor to the world reserve currency is? It's the euro, full of American allies. You want to know what's next after that? I believe it's the Japanese yen. Then after that, I believe it's the Canadian dollar, then the Chinese yuan, then I think it's the British and Australian pound. Point is, there's not a big competitor right now or one put forward by BRICS to the US dollar as world reserve currency. That doesn't mean we can spend endlessly, but the American dollar's collapse, quote unquote, while not impossible, is certainly not happening in the near immediate future, or is going to be, I think, affected that much by this war. And I think the Russians are going to move off of the dollar or be ready or be pursuing that type of goal, whether or not we support Ukraine. If we stop supporting Ukraine, do you think Russia is going to like pull out of BRICS and stop pursuing an alternative currency for world reserve? Of course they're not. They're going to pursue it aggressive either way. Because if you're a realist, and I've been reading a lot of realist theory recently, and I gotta read more liberal theory because I like to quote the things that I'm reading. But if you're a realist and you believe that a state's ultimate goal is survival, and that's what these states are aiming for here. Wait 1 second, I got a message. Oh, got you. Just Annabelle. Dang, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Anyway, yeah, no, the world reserve currency is not dying anytime soon. That status is not dying anytime soon. Yep. Where were we?
typically works is when we all become out there, because the way this typically works is when we all become involved parties is when it starts making direct impact to us. When we start feeling direct impact, then we say what? Well, I don't know if we're doing the right thing with this or not. It's not cool. Like,
it does. I've already explained a lot of the ways that has direct impact on us: nuclear weapons, trade, like just the percentage of the world economy, the possibility of international recession. I mean, the fact that we'd be losing a lot of strategic partners. And I mean, like, Article 5 has only been called once, and it was after 9/11, and their soldiers went with us into the Middle East. I do think having them as our ally is useful. Not only, and the thing is, if we want them to support us anywhere else in our endeavors, let's say that we wanted to support Taiwan or we want to support somewhere else, like, working with them more closely is going to be useful in that. If we want to pursue other things on the world stage, the more distant we become from them, the less likely they're going to entertain our endeavors.
this whole thing with Governor Hochul. What does she say?
Kathy Hochul.
Whatever her name is. Governor Hochul.
New York.
She says, we welcome you. We welcome you, right? Over here, we appreciate you. And then they're like, oh, really? Okay. Here's a few thousand illegal migrants. No. You guys got to leave. Eric Adams, no. You guys got to leave. Oh, what happened? Oh, when you're not directly impacted by it, it's a noble thing to do. The moment, boom, it hits your security and safety and your finances, then you're like, nah, man, I'm not for this. So all I'm saying is for us, in a situation like this, as much as they trashed the guy, the previous president, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. There was no wars going on. Now we got all these wars.
What? There was the war in Yemen that was going on, and he was actively pouring fuel on the fire for that. He had no interest in trying to push for peace in that arena. There was the war in Afghanistan.
Donated $5. Does
increased troop deployments.
Not know that our military involvement is one of the main reasons why the U.S. is so economically strong at that the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency.
Thank you so much for the $5. I don't think they think about that number that much. But then there was, of course, Operation Inherent Resolve, which Trump carried out. Was the finishing Obama's operation. I mean, he was doing raids. He was doing he massively expanded the drone war and then restricted data on the drone war.
Wars going on. Who's making all?
Why would he restrict public transparency on that, by the way?
The money here, and on the back end, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. I don't know.
God, I hate the BlackRock stuff, man. I've never heard somebody bring up BlackRock in conversation and then proceeded to be enlightened.
Whichever one it was, Rob, if you can pull these guys up, they're getting a $400 billion contract to rebuild Ukraine. Type in $400 billion rebuild Ukraine, okay?
It's like the Marshall Plan on steroids.
Is this the one, Rob? It's a story that was written about it. If you can go back, it'll be one of the stories. You type in news. You just type in news, you'll see it. So $400 billion, these guys are like, fantastic right there. No, that's not it. It's another one. I'll find it.
You're right. While it's pulling it up, can I?
By the way, this story, I think he's talking about the RFK story. We've covered it on the channel before. So I don't know what BlackRock is not a construction company. So BlackRock, as far as I know, didn't get a contract to rebuild Ukraine. There's many different companies that are getting contracts to rebuild different parts of Ukraine. That's how I know about the hostile civil military administration scandal, because of their attempt to rebuild that area, their attempted corruption around that, and then them pulling out. BlackRock didn't get and plus, if you just look this up, BlackRock, 400 billion Ukraine. What's this? Zelensky. Who is this? BlackRock PDF from the Epoch Times. Oh my God. What is that? Here it is. BlackRock and JP Morgan. There we go. Is this something that actually is real? Can you get an idea? BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase are helping the Ukrainian government set up a reconstruction bank to steer seed capital into rebuilding projects that could attract hundreds of billions of dollars in private investment. The Ukraine Development Funds remains in planning. Wait, but that's different from them dumping. The World Bank's estimate in March that Ukraine would need $411 billion to rebuild after the war. Oh, is that where the $400 billion came from? Okay, so they're setting up an investment bank. They're not giving them $400 billion. And then they're going to try to get seed capital into said bank. Wow, that's very different than what, than what they were saying. Wow, that's very different than the 400 billion. Okay, well, you know, that's only a totally different story. What is consultancy? What is this website? This doesn't look credible. I feel like, yeah, no, I don't see any credible website talking about this. Anyway, back here. That's probably why they can't find it. And I also know RFK talked about how Monsanto was buying up all like Ukraine's land, and it was part of the same BlackRock theory. And so if that's what he's talking about, we've already talked about that on the channel, how that's nonsense. Either way, I can't find any evidence for what he's claiming.
That's right.
Respond.
It's like Halliburton got in Iraq 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the same thing. It's not even comparable. And that's not even how that went. Whatever.
What you do, your analogy with Kathy Holcomb in New York, governor of New York.
I like how they like did a Google search in live time, couldn't find it, and instead of saying, "Oh, maybe that isn't true," they just said, "Oh, it's true. We'll just find it later." Okay.
I think is spot on. So I'm not going to give you pushback. That what I will say is what you're talking to is about the BRICS. You know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. We'll see what happens with that. Putin mentioned that in the interview as well. That is a.
It's so annoying how many of these foreign policy conversations are just so surface level, man. Like, God, wouldn't it be cool if they talked about this with like, I don't know, like a Ukrainian historian or like a Ukrainian economist or just like somebody who's seen a Ukraine. I don't know.
Concern of the
I'm not saying it has to be me. Literally anyone. Like Ukrainian, maybe.
U.S. dollar and the crumbling of the U.S. dollar, but that's been ongoing well before the Russian war. Sanctions in U.S. dollar.
I mean, America, I got 59% world reserve currency. When we say crumbling, we're like, it's gone down from, I think, what was it, 70% in like the early 2000s, or it was like mid 2010s to 59%. That's not crumbling.
Russia's been, when was BRICS originally formed?
It's a decrease, but that's because other economies have become more prominent.
Gifted 5 tier 1 subscriptions. I had a vision in a dream. The vision said I should gift subs, so you'll change my name since the site won't let me.
Is that it? Really? Sex, you know what? Send me an email at DylanBurnsTV with your name, and we'll see and what you want to change it into, and we'll see what we can do, okay? Thank you so much for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. To Dan Eater, Borgester, Jackson, Buck, and Nicoladus. Thank you so much for the 5 gifted tier 1s. Thank you.
2005? I find that, Rob. So this war, as much as it is sort of coalesced in that conversation, that is, okay.
He's giving him too much.
2009. The war started in Ukraine in 2002. So.
What? The war started in Ukraine in 2002? Yo, either this is a very niche reference to the Kerch Bridge scandal of that year, where all of Ukraine got mad because the Russians were very clearly trying to build out infrastructure into Ukrainian territory, which also I think is a good indicator of the idea that all of Ukraine wanted to be annexed by Russia is not really all that. It doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. But unless he's making a very niche reference, I think he either meant 2022 or 2014. But even if he meant 2022, that technically wouldn't be true. It'd be 2014.
The BRICS, that's already been formulated prior to what's going on here. But yes, it is exacerbating the problem, no doubt.
But isn't it unbelievable?
Can you just pull it up to just show the 400 billion around?
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think Russia falling on the sword in Ukraine, I think hurts them much more than it hurts us. I don't know how we're getting to the conclusion that America is losing influence because the Russians are falling on the sword. I mean,
go to the link you just showed real quick.
Or do we believe that the Russians would have pursued having American dollar dominance if they didn't invade Ukraine, or if we didn't sanction them after they invaded Ukraine?
Isn't it unbelievable though, Adam? Last week it was 118 billion. Let's protect our border. Oh, with Ukraine and Russia. Now it's to hell with the border. We don't give a shit about us. We have to help them. And if you're not,
by the way, helping them does care about us. Foreign policy has effects at the dinner table and how much money people get to be able to spend on the groceries at the end of the day. I think, for an example, like the hostage crisis in Iran and the gas price increase after the Iranian Revolution. I mean, at the end of the Carter administration, like that had a real impact. They see, oh, all of a sudden foreign policy matters, you know? These things matter. And again, the reason this failed, and we've talked about it before, is the Biden administration was ready to sign a Langford deal. Langford, Border Hawk, Oklahoma, Langford. It's able to sign, it was going to sign a deal that would make it, hey, if you're coming from Guatemala to America and you could have stopped in another country first, you're going to be rejected. It hits the level 4,000 passengers a day, they're going to, boom, shut down the border. There was so much in here that was just a gift to the Republicans and so little that the Democrats got in return. It was some funding for, I think, immigration judges, which was a victory. But for example, there was nothing in there about the Dreamers, nothing to settle that issue. Something that's been a big issue for Democrats for a while, even before the Obama administration. Point is, this issue has not been like this issue was being tended to. Then Trump sank it. Then Trump said no because he wanted immigration to be an issue on the campaign trail. He didn't want this issue because it didn't give them everything they wanted, because it wasn't like H.R. 2, which wasn't a bill that was meant to pass. It was a bill that was meant to be used for messaging. It was a chest-pounding bill, not a legislative bill. And there are two types of bills. There's bills that you introduce to pass, and there's bills that you introduce to message on. And that's what H.R. 2 was. And so asking to pass that in place of the deal that was negotiated over a 5-month period, which Democrats didn't need to agree to because they have the Senate and they have the presidency. And not only do they have the Senate and presidency, but these are two separate issues, man. These are two totally separate issues. A deal like this has never been done before. Nobody has ever paired these two things before. And Biden was willing to play ball, and it still wasn't enough. Because it was election season and it didn't help Trump. And now that was taken off, the Ukraine coalition is like, okay, so we're just going to pass it like originally, even though we wasted 120 days and the Ukrainians are feeling the full bite of the ammo shortage. And now it's, what is it again? Oh, we need to do something on the border. Even after they added the fentanyl sweetener. And as in they added some fentanyl legislation to make the deal better for the Republicans. And better for everyone, just because people want to deal with fentanyl. But I'm just incredibly frustrated by this whole process.
Asking the question of why. It's unbelievable. Hold on, Adam, because you said
why. There's a whole series of events that explains why. It's mostly partisan reasons.
You still didn't really answer the question. Are you cool with the $95 billion? Are you cool with that?
My answer to that is no, because there should be 150, and primarily concentrating on Ukraine and Taiwan.
Just going?
Well, listen.
Yes or no?
I'm not cutting that check. But
no,
okay,
yes, you are.
The hell you aren't.
Yeah,
okay,
you are.
So hold on.
Yeah,
Relax.
you are.
Okay, just relax. I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
How much money should we send to our allies around the world? You give me a number. Let's say I'm cool with the 95. I'm cool with it.
You're cool with it?
Tell me how much.
Me
Just
personally,
answer
absolutely zero.
Okay.
Hold on. Absolutely zero.
So you're an isolationist.
No. I am an America first. America first. Our board, Adam.
Dude, I'm sorry, dude. It has really the ideology hasn't evolved at all in like the last 100 years. America first, World War II. It hasn't, dude. It's it hasn't changed at all, man. It's the same. We've had these guys since the start of the country. We're gonna have them till the end. Woo! We're always to the end. We're gonna be arguing with these guys, no matter how bad it gets.
How can we? We're a sinking ship.
We can still deal with the border in a separate bill.
Bullshit. No, we can't.
You guys are talking out of both sides of your mouth, and I'll tell you why.
How?
Because you're like, it's called the border bill, but all the money went to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan. Okay, cool. So now the border bill can be addressed.
Can't wait. But this is the thing. Why couldn't we vote on a border bill in Ukraine separately? And if the border bill doesn't get the votes, then it doesn't get the votes. That's democracy. Ukraine bill does, then it passes. This is the problem, right? I am seeing so many people people who are like, usually would be like, you know, I'm all for the populism, I'm all for what's popular, I'm all for like letting democracy happen, and I'm sick of all these omnibus bills and bringing everything together. The Ukraine bill has overwhelming support in the Senate, overwhelming support in the House, and is supported by the president. And all of the countries that it wants to send aid to are overwhelmingly liked by the American people. And the American people, either as a plurality or majority, Pew Research being the lowest numbers I've seen by a credible pollster, still saying a plurality of Americans either want to keep sending aid to Ukraine or, like me, want to increase sending aid to Ukraine. Now, there's a certain big section of the Republican Party that disagrees, but the Republican Party is not the country. As we just saw from the New York special election, you guys losing another House seat. So if this is a question of what's popular, what the American people want, we have an answer for that. We got the representatives for that. Just hold a vote and be done with it on each of these pieces separately. That would be my position. But Mike Johnson doesn't want to host a vote because he'd know that it would pass. Trump doesn't want it to pass. And there are certain people in his party who have unpopular political positions, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who want to hold on to it for leverage and don't want it to pass, even if her position is unpopular and against America's national security interests. So she's using that 2-vote majority to leverage her vote to stop it from even having a vote on it. How about this? We have a vote on HR 2, and then we have a vote on Ukraine aid. Boom, boom, one after the other. Why not? Because they know that HR 2 wouldn't pass, and they know that Ukraine aid would. And if, no matter how this election goes, once this is over, and if either they lose the House and we take it back and then we keep everything else, then they're not going to get any deal. And then they just wasted their opportunity. All for Trump. If they do take back, if they keep the House, then we're going to be in the same place, same situation. And it's still, they've given up that opportunity because many progressives didn't like the deal. I had problems with the deal too. And if they take back the Senate, keep the House, and even take back the presidency, they still need 60 votes. And they're not going to get a veto. They're not going to get 60 Republicans in the Senate. So the Democrats could just block it unless they wanted to go past the veto, which if there was any president that would, it would be Trump. But there's a good reason to believe that once this opportunity is gone, which it already is, they're just not going to get an offer like this again. And they just like shot in the foot the only chance they were going to get a lot of their priorities through in the near future.
Independently as a single issue. Have the fucking debate.
Adam, let me ask this. And by the way, the way we're feeling is the way America's feeling. Okay.
Everybody feels that way, don't they? Again, like, look, let's look at a Pew Research Center Ukraine. Like, Americans still view Ukraine very positively. Now, when you go to like support for Ukraine, let's look at this graph. Americans are split over U.S. support for Ukraine. This is the poll that I mentioned that says plurality, because this is the poll that I found that is credible, that is the worst for Ukraine supporters. Americans are split over U.S. support for Ukraine. Percentage you say that when it comes to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. is providing blank support for Ukraine. Not enough, 18, that's where I am. 29 about right, 31 too much, 22 not sure. So the plurality here, 29-18, is either not enough or about right, meaning continuing the aid packages, or aid packages aren't enough, increase it. About 30% of the country says, no, we're doing too much. So 30% is not a majority. That's not the majority of the country. It's just not. The more Americans support sending more or about the amount of aid we're sending right now to Ukraine. So him saying that's how America's feeling is just not true. But if you go to Republicans, 48% too much, 20% about right, 13% not enough, 18% not sure. That's the group they're in. So that's why they say that's what America feels like. And then you go to Democrats, exact opposite, right? There are more Democrats that believe we're sending not enough than too much. Democrats are the pro-Ukraine party. At least that's the case now.
Right? Meaning, some are feeling like him, some are feeling like me, some are feeling like you and Tom. But America's feeling like this. This is not just a conversation that's taking place here. Here's a question I want to ask you.
Oh, does he mean like America's feeling like they're divided in here? Well, statistically, they're not feeling like that room. Statistically, there would be like 2 more of that guy to his left. Or maybe like 3 more. It'd be
okay. So let's just say your kids are going to private school, okay? And you're down to your last $22,000 in the bank. You and your wife are married. You got 3 kids, okay? and you had a setback. Your wife had a job, she got fired. She was bringing in 82 grand a year, okay? And you can't count on that now. That 82 is gone. And you need to find a way to pay for this bill to go to school this next month, $1,500. Let's say $2,500, $800 a kid, right? I come to you and I say, hey, Adam, I need $6,000. And you say, what do you mean you need $6,000? I need $6,000. Before you give me the $6,000, who are you going to talk to? Your wife.
Probably going to talk to your wife. Yeah.
Which you're supposed to do.
But can I just throw this out there, though? If you wanted to agree to send somebody $6,000, though, you'd at least have a vote, right? You wouldn't have one guy in the household just be like, I've decided we're not even going to discuss it. No. So you would have a vote in this. I just want to say that, right? You'd have a vote, especially if the majority of the House would vote in favor, right? Just saying.
Do that. So you go talk to your wife, and you say, "Hey, babe, Pat needs money, man. I want to give him $6,000." What do you think your wife's going to say?
We need that money for our kids.
Well, it depends on what it's. Well, it depends. Like if it's like, hey, Pat's going to start a militia. Like you have to ask what he's going to use it for, right? If Ukraine just said we want $6 billion and we said for what, and they were like for money, then yeah, I would say it would be bad to give them the money.
She's going to say, babe, are you kidding me? We have $20,000. We're down to 20. We had 100 last year. I had a job. I lost it. That 82,000. I can't get another job.
This is not the conditions the country are in. And can I also say, I hate personal finance comparisons, the country finance comparison, because the financial situation between countries and individual budgets are completely different. The deficit spending is completely different. The way that you can have a deficit and still not increase your debt is not something that's really possible in personal finances. That is something that you can do in a national budget, depending on the inflationary, depending on how the value of the dollar changes year over year, as total value of that debt doesn't increase, depending on if you're balancing the deficit spending well enough, and depending on how you manage economic growth. Especially if a recession was to start to happen, you might have to deficit spend to some degree to get you out of that recession, or you're going to go into a death spiral that's going to be much worse than some debt. If, for example, European economic stability was to break down and we could have spent maybe $150 billion in supporting the Ukrainian armed forces to $200 billion supporting the Ukrainian armed forces, stopping the Russians, and could have kept that economic stability, or we lose one of our main export economies, or it is greatly diminished. One of our main export markets, our number one export market. Not to even talk about the possible increased cost if we have to increase NATO deployments. Point is, like, I don't think these things are comparable. It's part of the reason why somebody's saying that a good businessman doesn't necessarily make them a good statesman.
The bill is due. How are you going to pay that $2,500? You want to give Pat $6,000? I know he's your friend. I know you want to help him. But, bro, you got to pay your $25 for the kids first. You're like, no, I'm going to pay to Pat first. What is the responsible thing for you to do?
Well, it's...
By the way, you can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, by the way, as a country. Like, if we had to spend the $6,000... Like, if somebody said, hey, you made an agreement with us that if you had an agreement with Pat, that if Pat's house was ever attacked, you'd give him this money so he could defend himself, then, well, obviously the situation has changed a little bit. It's just not a good comparison.
Sounds like your kids aren't going to private school anymore. Sounds like they need to be enrolled in public school at that point, if that's the only money you have to life.
Perfect. Okay, let's go there as well. By the way, you're even taking my argument to a better place. I agree. So guess what? Let's remove some entitlement programs we have in America.
Sure.
Let's play that card. So now you put them in public school. So now your wife's convinced you to take your kids out of private school, put them in public school. Are you still giving me the $6,000?
It depends on what it's for. Like, if it's just worthless spending, that's different. But I think nuclear non-proliferation and stopping terrorists from getting nuclear weapons is beneficial to us. Because if there's any country in the world that a terrorist group wanted to target with a nuclear weapon to try to destabilize the world economy, it'd be somewhere like New York, man. Which is what terrorists have done before. Just throwing out there.
Well, It depends on what your $6,000 is for. Am I getting return on my investment?
Okay, so now you're thinking from the perspective of investment. This is not an investment. You're not going to get the money back.
This is
What do you mean? There's investment in security. It's investment in nuclear nonproliferation. It's investment in European security. European security means European stability. European stability means European consumers. European consumers mean buying American products. I mean, come on. This is how we built one of the strongest middle class, the strongest middle class in the world in the 50s and the 60s, the period which Trump's supporters say we want to make America great again and bring us back to.
Well, if Trump wants us to be alone,
you are not.
Like, who else do we sell our product? We sell products to other countries, but Europe is pretty important.
Getting this money back. No, that's BS. This is not a money coming back. You're never.
Well, the thing is, when we invest in a road, we don't get money back. When we spend on that road and we pave a road, we don't get money back directly from that road. We get money back indirectly through that road, because now somebody can travel along that road, go to work, get a job, do the job, come back, pay taxes. Then we've gotten money back from that road, right? It brings something back later. And are we really going to say that a stable, democratic, integrated Ukraine that is buying American defense products, that is buying other American products, that is rich in resources and grain, is not going to be useful at all to us? Is not going to be useful at all, really? It's already becoming useful. That's not even talking about, again, upholding American credibility and general European stability.
Never gonna see a penny of me ever again, and you've been giving me money.
Like, if, for example, if the deal was, hey, you said in this specific situation, Alex, you'd give me $2,000, and then Alex doesn't, then in the future, if Alex wants to enter arrangements with people, this could be a hit to Alex's credibility, and it's going to be harder if he's a businessman to make deals with other people. Again, you have to get really nuanced. You have to add so many different asterisks and addendums to make these personal business comparisons work, which is why I want to avoid them completely.
Investing in the
you just study IR if you want. Study IR if you really want to make some sort of comparison.
Global world order.
You're investing.
No, there's no chaos.
You're investing in a friend.
We're just not gonna like the Houthi situation. We're just gonna let them just
stay here.
Run like rebels in the Red Sea.
No, this is not Houthis. Russia's not Houthis.
That's part of it.
Stay with this.
That's part of it.
So let's just say you give me the money, okay?
Yeah.
And you keep giving me the money. What I do is by you giving me the money is my wife and I, we have a lesser chance of being separated. I stop calling you and bitching about my finances. So now you're like, well, Ma, babe, I'm giving them the money so they can stay together. Meanwhile, your wife is like, bro, you may not stay together with me of what you're doing. So
Dude, I'm sorry. 0.4% of GDP spending is not going to collapse America or make us all shoot each other or anything like that, especially since much of this stuff has already been produced and we're just sitting in American stockpiles.
Trying to...
It's not gonna... Come on, this is...
Save here is affecting your life. That's what American people are having a hard time with. They're having a hard time with this concept to say, you just fooled us. You told us a border bill, and
no. We didn't fool anybody. The Biden administration at least didn't fool anybody. They agreed to a deal. Then the Republicans said, screw the deal. It was like, fine, then we'll try to pass it independent of the deal. And now they're angry that there's no deal.
Everybody in the media said, look at the Republicans. They say they want to help the border, but none of them give a shit about the border, right? And America bought it. Then 3 weeks later, after you call it a border bill, 2 weeks later, after you call it a border bill, you simply remove $20 billion.
Because they rejected it. The reason why Democrats were willing to negotiate on the border like this is not only because it was an issue that concerns a lot of Americans, but it was also because it was being leveraged to stop the Ukraine aid. And the Ukraine aid is something that's on a timer. Wars don't just like last forever. War isn't just going to be waiting there when we finish our domestic political stuff. The war is ongoing. And so since they said this deal wasn't going to work, they were like, well, this was attached to this. And originally we were supposed to pass it back in September of last year. It's been over 120 days. And then they're going to pass it independently. But now it's like, oh, well, how dare you? Well, if you sink the border bill, then we still need to pass the Ukraine aid. We still need to support our allies.
Out of it, 23 billion out of it, which the 23 billion was supposed to go to the border. Now you say, no, it's only a 195 billion.
Because they didn't want the deal. They said, Trump specifically said, sink the deal. We couldn't have got it through even if we wanted to. The Republicans in the House wouldn't even have a vote on it.
Our bill, it's Ukraine, Taiwan, and what do you call it, Israel. What's the point? You never had the intention of fixing the border.
They were ready. The Republicans sunk it. They sunk the deal. What is this revisionism?
You wouldn't. And by the way, and then when you say the
This is wild revisionism, man. It all depends on what lens you look at the world, huh?
just following, you're like, well, let's first fix this, and then we'll go fix the border. No, let's fix the border first.
That's both of those are stupid. Both things, either being like, I need to fix the forward issues and then I can fix the domestic issues, or I gotta fix the domestic issues, then forward issues. If the domestic issue has gotten to a point where the state is literally collapsing, which we're not at, then you can make an argument. But if you ignore the rest of the world while you try to resolve every domestic issue, it's never gonna end. It's gonna be, well, until we can deal with Ukraine, we gotta deal with the border. Fine, okay, here's a border deal. Well, I mean, you say you want to help them before you even help our homeless veterans? Oh, fine, okay, there. Well, I mean, there's still children going to school. It's never going to end. There's always going to be another issue, which is why you try to solve both and you deal with both. You can chew and you can chew bubblegum, walk at the same time. You can multitask. It's possible. You know, that's how nation states are supposed to work. They're supposed to have like foreign relations and domestic relations. But if they're not willing to compromise on a domestic issue that they've tied to a national security issue, that doesn't mean the national security issue just goes away and the Republicans decide, okay, campaign season's over, now we can talk border again.
Then let's go fix the
Bro,
world.
I agree with you. Okay. I would rather them pass a border bill before this bill.
Then perfect.
I'm with that.
But they're not doing.
But that's not what they proposed.
That's not the. That's not the point.
You're asking which one I'd rather do. I'd rather do both.
No. You
it's
said
called domestic and foreign agenda.
No, you said.
Damn, got him. Sorry, I'm just. This is very frustrating to me. I'm being a little sassy, but it just feels so low effort.
So you guys are acting like we can only in America first.
Adam, I'm simply stating what you said. You said, let's first get this $95 billion, and then let's go focus on the border.
No,
how's the border not the first one?
Am I a freaking senator? Am I the person proposing this bill? We're reacting to the news of the day. They passed this bill in the Senate. That's what we're discussing. Believe me, I would much rather them focus on the border, but they're not. Why? Ask yourself why they're not putting the border first.
Because they don't give a shit about us. They want
we know the
fucking
Democrats
war.
want an open.
I've seen this guy before. I swear to the heavens, okay? I've never seen this guy say anything insightful. And I mean that. And I've watched like 3 or 4 episodes with this guy on at this point, and each time is just screaming at the top of his lungs, getting mad, waving his arms around, just throwing out a bunch of theories, most of it unsubstantiated, just fucking yelling, and nothing substantial, nothing being added. I think he's trying to like channel the anger of the comment section or something. I have no clue, but I've never seen this guy substantially contribute to a conversation in a productive manner.
Open border policy. And Trump, what is Trump doing? Basically saying, do not pass a border bill. Why? Because it's politics. He doesn't want a border bill because he wants to run on the fact that migrants are running into our country like it's a open border situation, which it is. So he wants to run on that.
Adam, let me say
That's his agenda. I would much rather, to be super freaking clear here, I would much rather them pass a border bill first. But that's not what they did. They did a foreign aid package.
Yeah.
So we're commenting on that.
No, but the trend, the continuous trend is the world comes before America.
Yep. The world is, I'm sorry. The world affects America. America affects the world. If China was to disappear tomorrow, the American economy would collapse. It would collapse immediately. And so you need to consider the world, and you need to consider the interconnectedness of the world, or you will not ever be able to look out truly for the United States. The Japanese made this mistake, and how did it end? It ended up with Japanese ships, with American ships on the shoreline, ready to bombard their shores if they didn't open up. And then they were victimized because they didn't want to consider the rest of the world. And you have to consider the rest of the world. And this idea that we only consider the rest of the world, we don't consider our own affairs, I also find that nonsense. Again, Americans believe that foreign aid on our federal budget makes up 20 to 25% of our budget. It makes up 1%. I'm not saying we don't spend money on a bunch of things overseas, but the majority of our budget and the majority of our deficit has nothing to do with foreign aid and has nothing to do with what we're sending over to the Ukrainians. If you want to look at the big increase in the deficit, the most recent addition to it would again be the Trump tax cuts.
Yep.
That's the continuous trend. That is the level of frustration with the American people.
Thank you.
That the world comes before America. That is bullshit. If you and I are friends,
Dude, we delayed this aid for 120 days so we could tie border to it. Totally separate issue. After Mike Johnson said at the start, we need to separate these issues. I'm sick of all these omnibus bills. Matt Gaetz patting them on the back, egging them on. And then that's what we're back to. We're back to these big bills with a bunch of unrelated issues. And we've never had something like this happen before. We're tying the border issue to aid to a foreign country at war. It's insane. It's insane that we're even doing this in the first place. But they entertained it. They went down the road, and it ended up falling through anyway.
no matter how good of a friend I am to you, your wife comes first. Your kids comes first. You take care of your family. Then if you can help me, help me. But my job, your job is to take care of your family first. The job of somebody here, if I have the resources I'm investing into Vitamin and PBD Podcast and David Consulting and Minect and everything we're building, imagine if I'm like, nah, forget about this money. Let me do it here. Let me give it to this guy. Let me give it to this guy. And then we get smaller. We have fewer resources. The reason why we have more resources here is because we keep reinvesting into it. America's not reinvesting.
This is the thing. The reason we have the wealth we have today is because we made the decision like, hey, if we don't defend this area of Europe, not only are we not going to have allies against the, communist encroachment, whatever, we're not going to have consumers. We're not have people buying our products. We engage in the Marshall Plan. Now, the Marshall Plan, I think sometimes is overblown how much it helped rebuild Europe. A lot of it was political. A lot of it was the political vote of confidence that America was here to stay, that America wouldn't make these investments if they weren't here to stay. And that also encouraged investment. That encouraged investment from the United States. The investment in the United States helped the people of Europe build up. Once they built up, they needed to buy products. But hey, where are the factories? Where all the products are being made? Well, Mr. Uncle Sam has them. And then Mr. Uncle Sam sells them to the Europeans. Then the Europeans send back their dough. And where does the dough go? Right in the pocket of Little Joe. And that's the relationship we've had with Europe for 80 years. And I'd like to preserve it. It's a good relationship.
Investing in protecting us at the southern border, but you don't feel it because there is no southern border in Miami. There is no southern border in Fort Lauderdale. There is nobody coming from the bottom except for maybe Cuba, and we haven't had that since the Muriel Boatlift in 1979. We don't have that here, so it's not felt. Rest of America is feeling it, and it's getting very frustrating where politicians are manipulating. Now, if this goes to the House...
If you're not there on the world stage to help make the rules, then you will be excluded, and the rules will not include your interests. That's part of the reason why the Chinese and the Russians are on the world stage saying maybe the rules should be rewritten. Because a lot of the rules, when they were written, they were not there at the table to help write them. Now, some of the rules maybe do need to be adjusted. Others are being adjusted for cynical, individualistic in that one country's interest that dominate its neighboring countries. Like there's some rules that maybe need to change, other rules that don't need to change. But if we're not at the table, then it's going to be the Chinese and the Russians that are writing the rules. Going to be writing how trade goes. Oh, this is how trade goes. These are how international laws go. And hey, even if you say that's not how America is going to play by those laws, if other countries are playing by those laws, then it affects us. If they have certain restrictions they're placing on trade, that affects us if we trade with them. The Chinese are going to engage with the Europeans even if we don't. And if we ever want the Europeans to back us up in any engagement with the Chinese, be it military, diplomatic, financial, whatever it is, we don't care about their security interests. Not going to give a fuck about ours. Article 5 has been called once, and that was after 9/11. Why the fuck would they ever come and help us at 9/11 too if the one time they were really threatened and we didn't even have to put our soldiers on the line, just send them the stuff that's rotting in our lots, and we said no for a minuscule impact on our budget. And we held it up for 120 days to tie it to a totally separate issue. There's a reason why Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, British, Danish, German, all these politicians are coming over. Former British prime ministers, multiple former British prime ministers, I think 3. Man, I just wish there was, in these conversations, they just included somebody who could advocate for the transatlantic system. I don't even buy into all of the premises of the transatlantic system, but people are just completely abandoning any and all value to it to the point where I feel like I'm always in the defense mode.
And what do they need? 218? They need 218? What was the number they said? If they need 218, And I don't know if it's going to pass or not, but if this passes, this is...
But they also need Mike Johnson to bring it to the floor. This is the thing. It's not a question of it's unpopular on the House floor. It would win the vote. Even those in the Freedom Caucus, in the House Freedom Caucus, they're even saying if there's a House floor on it, it will likely pass. So it's got the votes. It's just that Mike Johnson literally is denying a vote on it. Why not let the votes decide? I think it deserves to have a vote after 120 days of delay.
More of a reason where you see this is not about Republicans and Democrats. This is all about establishment and anti-establishment, because if Republicans don't have the backbone to stand strong to say, we will entertain a bill like...
They need 6. That's how many votes the Democrat. They need like 3-4 votes. I mean, come on, man. Like they need like single-digit votes to pass this if they're able to get them to sign on to an amendment to avoid the House Speaker, even if it would be embarrassing for them. Like if those 5 break, it's because Republicans were weak. Or is it because that Mike Johnson's poor leadership saying that I won't abandon Ukraine, then proceeds to abandon Ukraine, then says, okay, let's make a border deal, then sinks said border deal, and then once they try to pass Ukraine aid again because he said he wouldn't abandon Ukraine after all, he says he doesn't want to have a vote on it until they have a border deal, which he just sunk. Whose fault would that be? The strength of the Republican Party or management? Management, that's rookie management, by the way. This guy this is the highest ranking position he ever thought he was going to. He never thought he'd get this far this fast. Let's remind everybody that this guy is not a veteran legislator, Mike Johnson. This is quite all very new for him. He seems like he's a little in over his head, actually.
This after we deal with the border. After we protect us first, then there is no lack of a proper negotiation there. No one's doing a strong arm negotiation from the Republican side. The Republicans should stick together and say, listen, man.
Dude, the bill that you got was from strong arming our aid. I didn't want to sign the deal. I wouldn't like the deal. I don't even like the Israel-Ukraine aid is together. But it was all being strong armed. It was like, okay, just get it through. And then you abandoned it. Then they abandoned it. And I was like, oh, strong arm them. Strong arm them into what? Passing HR2, it's a non-starter. What could you strong arm them into? What needs to be given up that wasn't given up? And how long would it take to negotiate again? Another 5 months of waiting? The Ukrainians can't wait that long. They've already waited too long.
Fix the damn border first, then let's talk Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. That's all I'm saying.
That's not how the world works, man. It's not.
But that's not what they did. So that's not what we're talking about.
No, we are.
Believe me, the old I can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Really?
I'm not arguing with you right here. I would much rather the Senate propose a border bill.
He said really like that was a stupid comment, but then didn't retort it.
First.
Look, it's unbelievable that they didn't have them.
We're in agreement here.
I know.
Guys.
I'm with you.
You're acting like I'm fucking being an asshole. I agree with you.
You are.
No.
Okay, how am I being an asshole?
Asshole? He's 1v3.
Tom, because I'm commenting on the fact.
Let's hear what Tom has to say.
You're not
Go ahead,
commenting. You're not commenting. You've been running over people for 20 damn minutes, and you
oh my God! What is this? Dude, he's been having a back and forth with 2 people that disagree with him, now 3. God, man. Come on. Let's put him in an environment like that. Let's have him sit across from 3 Ukrainians and Europeans and maybe even an American defense official. Just anyone. Literally anyone. Just talk to him about the war in Ukraine, the transatlantic alliance, the benefits we have with one another. Let's put him in a situation that guy's going through. And that guy isn't exactly that well informed on the situation. I'm not saying he's stupid. I'm just saying he's not like an expert on it. He's winging it.
You've reset arguments.
He's winging it, and he's frustrating you this much.
So we do nothing. That's such a lazy retort. Why don't we come?
It's literally that is your solution. It is do nothing until we fix all the other things. But that's not how wars work. Could you imagine World War II is happening, and you're like, should we send the aid to the Soviets? Well, and people were saying this at the time, and they were called America Firsters too, by the way, because there's a direct ideological line, okay, between the American First Movement then, the American First Movement now. They were saying, no, we need to deal with this issue, that issue, Great Depression, that. But the American administration and the statesmen of the time the statesmen of the time, they recognized that the 30 years crisis that led up to World War II was escalating. They saw the trajectory and they knew they had to be ready. And as we see the Russians saying, you know, Russia's borders end nowhere. They're asking for the nuclear umbrella to be removed from multiple post-Soviet states. And they're pushing hard. I think we have to be ready as well. And I think that supporting Ukraine is part of that.
Back to what's going on here. This is establishment versus anti-establishment.
Not even to say we have to go down this path, but if that, we should be prepared for that scenario at the very least.
Anti-establishment. We want a line item veto. We want a balanced budget amendment so this can't go on unchecked. Establishment. It's not a bill. It's a deal. And the deal contains all kinds of other provisions, as you just pointed out, the J.D. Vance.
Yes, so this is my problem. Let's vote on it all separately, one by one by one by one by one. That's what Matt Gaetz said originally was going to happen. That's what Mike Johnson said was originally going to happen, but that's not what's happening.
Said in an op-ed, and he's absolutely correct. There's earmarks, there's provisions, there's pork, there's a bunch of stuff. And then they put a branding on it to flow to the media to deceive you and redirect your attention.
Deceive you? Come on.
From what's really going on in there. Do I think there's...
What's in there that's bad? Let me hear what's in there that's bad. I think there's things in there that I don't like, but I don't want to hear his things.
Should be money for Iron Dome in there? I do.
He's not even against. Oh, he just wants aid to Israel. He doesn't want aid to Ukraine. He wants. Okay, yeah. Okay, got you. Okay, he one of those.
But to get Iron Dome, does somebody that feels that strongly about it say, oh, but I also have to agree to this? That's the way these deals are made. They're not bills anymore. They're establishment deals that have a bunch of stuff in them. And
by the way, that's how like legislating America has always worked. By the way, like deals and stuff like this. I mean, you can say that you don't like that type of deal making, and you can say deal making has to change, but it's not like a new phenomenon.
I'm sure Zelensky is very pleased that he got the relief from it because
he has it. It's not. They're not gonna have a vote on it.
Spring collection from Louis Vuitton is looking pretty good. And
dude, shut the fuck up. You fucking mealy-mouthed little bitch. I'm sorry, man. You don't know what you're talking about. Shut the fuck up. What is this how does it go to the Louis Vuitton collection? 90% of it's gonna be spent in the United States. How does that go to Louis Vuitton? It's gonna be spent in American manufacturers making weapons to be sent over there. Dude, everybody just loves to like hint towards corruption. None of them know shit about corruption in Ukraine. You want to quiz any of this guy? You think this guy knows the hospital military administration? Do you think this guy knows anything about the shell companies or reconstruction of Bucha or any corrupt dealings there? You think this guy knows anything about the military jacket scandal or any of that shit? No. They all have got like the FTX like vision of corruption in Ukraine. I just once, can someone bring up corruption in Ukraine and reference actual corruption scandals so we can put actual pressure on this section of the Ukrainian government that is corrupt? That'd be so beautiful, but it's never that.
And they're going to there'll be corruption, and they're buying, and they're doing these things. It's flowing out. It's terrible.
Hey, you know, this thing, and then that thing, and then this thing. No specifics, but it's all half. It's just all a circle. It's X-Files.
I go back to what Trump said about NATO, and your argument, I think, was lazy. What, do we do nothing? No, we don't do nothing. Trump said, I'm all in on NATO. You are our friends. You are our allies. But in the middle of his...
That's not what he said. That is not what he said.
Administration, what did he say? You have to pick up the check, and I want you to pay your fair share.
The problem isn't that he's asking them to pay their fair share. Multiple administrations have asked them to pay their fair share. He connected paying the 2% to the defense of said country. But the majority of NATO countries are not paying 2%. And if we were to send that signal, which that signal has now been sent, and he has said that publicly, and then said, in those scenarios, if one of those countries not paying 2% is attacked, even though this is not a mandatory rule of NATO, the 2% number, it's a suggestion. That means you should still do it, but it is a suggestion. If a country goes through some economic crisis or something, they're at 1.2 and they're Estonia, and they can't pay the 2%, Russia attacks, do whatever the hell they want. That's the message he sent. Now, whether or not this is just strong arm, like you know, economic negotiations, the Russians have uncertainty about our intentions. All states would have uncertainty about the intentions when you hear something like that. Is Trump truly dedicated to NATO and he's just trying to get them to pay a little bit more? Or is Trump not that dedicated to NATO, seeing how much he can get out of it, and if you can pay him a prettier penny, maybe he would be willing to go? Or if we can make it cost too much for him, maybe he'll back off. And then the Russians start questioning our credibility, start questioning our deterrent, and then they start to probe. And then you have a crisis. This is why you don't degrade your credibility. This is why you don't degrade your deterrent. We want the Europeans to pay more, but we shouldn't encourage the Russians to attack in the process.
And Trump was back. I got stuff with my country that I'm going to deal with first. I'm not going to leave you behind. I'm not going to abandon my foreign policy and my friends and my allies, but I'm going to take care of America first. But you, if I participate and I help you in NATO, you got to pick up the check. These were not island nations with 2 palm trees with a hut.
Some of them are, by the way. I mean, like when we talk about like Denmark, what are we expecting from them, right? What are we expecting from Denmark?
These were thriving economies.
Denmark, by the way, has contributed a lot per capita to Ukraine, a lot. One of the, I think, top 10 contributors per capita.
That have resources and the ability to pay the check, and they wanted us to just keep flowing it out. That's why he went toe-to-toe with Germany and said, pick up the check. That is foreign policy.
And now the Germans have a $72 billion military budget, and they're contributing more bilaterally than any other European state. Like, they're going down the pathway we want, and we're angry at them?
America first, work on the things in America, work on the things that matter to us.
Like, if you want to, like, call out individual countries. Like, people talk about the Germans, but the Germans are, like, while they got a lot of shit at the start of supply in Ukraine, they've been taking a lot more of the lead now. They can still send over the Taurus missile. There's still some failings, but, like, compared to the Italians? Compared to the French? Compared to the Spanish? No, come on.
And on the foreign stage, find an equitable way that one thing I'll correct you on, Vinny, one thing. You said tax money. It's not tax money.
Dylan, can we get you on these stages? Man, I'd like to. I try, but I think a lot of, I don't know. I'm not a big content creator, so I think there's not a huge motive to collaborate with me on that level. And while I am an independent journalist, I don't have that gigantic of a platform. I think that's maybe one thing against it. And also, like, if I don't have a big platform, but I also like super focus on this issue, and therefore most likely going to be a lot more focused on it than the person I'm talking to. Like, if they disagree with me and then they do bad in the conversation, even if they were to do well, they don't get much out of it. You get what I'm saying? Like, if I went on Tim Pool's show and then Tim Pool made me look like a moron, they wouldn't get that much out of it. Because at the end of the day, I'm like a 75,000 sub YouTube channel on my main channel. Right? But the risk reward ratio is just way off for them. But for me, it's like, there's no way I lose in that scenario. Like, I would have to like actually like take like multiple tabs before going on Tim Pool's show to get to a level where I lose so hard that I'm just oh. And I'm not saying that each conversation has to be a win-lose scenario. You can have a normal conversation somewhere where we're not trying to done and dunk. But I think since a lot of people showed that I would like to go on, I do disagree with them on this. That is considered. Nobody wants to embarrass themselves, and especially you don't want to embarrass yourself too. And I don't want to put it this way, but I just will, to a 22-year-old.
Money. It's future debt, and it's big stacks of it that affects the long-term monetary system.
I'm not saying that I'm more brilliant than all these guys. I'm just saying that, the risk is at the very least considered. Not that I would even necessarily hit it out of the park.
Future debt, and it's big stacks of it that affects the long-term monetary system with an impact, which is exactly what happens with Russia shifting the currencies they're using to do trade. It's all
I don't know what long-term economic impact that's going to have, considering Russia's GDP is smaller than California's. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying that to be realistic. Russia wants the ruble to be the world reserve currency, but it's not going to happen because, the ruble was worth less than a cent like a few months ago.
All interconnected. And I'm sorry I'm getting a little upset here, but Tom, I've been quiet for 20 minutes, and I'm telling you.
There will be a competitor to the dollar one day. I don't see it yet. Maybe decentralization's that competitor.
I think we got to keep our eye on the ball and what's really going on here.
Tom, I appreciate your passion and your wisdom. I do. But, you know, Vinny wants to give zero.
Yep.
Cool. That's Vinny's opinion.
Yep.
Zero money for anybody. Let's say there is a border bill. Let's just say there is. We all should hope one. We all want that, yes? You said that you would support the Iron Dome. Okay, they're going to give how much? $14 billion to Israel. Tell me an amount.
I said the guys that supported Iron Dome get cornered and they have to vote on a deal.
I get it.
It's not a bill. It's a deal.
Okay, a bill.
Why is he so exasperated?
Deal. I get it. It's a proposal.
But it's a bunch of money for other
it's
stuff.
It's a foreign aid package. It's a bill. It's a deal. Where it's semantics.
It's a package because we tried to pass it individually in September and everyone was like, no, 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 no. And then we kept bundling and bundling and bundling because time went on. Other issues came up.
For an aid.
It's not
All this could have been settled back in September, man.
semantics. If I want to help
Tom, here's
Israel,
my
and I
question.
said, why can't we just
Whatever.
vote on that? Senator Tom, I'm not going to let you vote on Iron Dome. If you want Iron Dome, then I got to get this. And I'm cornered. That's the way it works.
I understand that. So how much money would you give to Ukraine? How much money would you give to Taiwan? How much money would you give to Israel? How much money would you give to these allies of ours? Vinny's at zero. How many are you at? The U.S. Senate is at 95.
I don't have a budget in front of me, but the first thing I'd be taking care of is the United States of America and our border.
Oh my God. What a non-answer, man. Dude, does he need to wait for Trump to give him the opinion?
We've already said that.
Okay.
You're evading the question. Just
I'm
give
not
me a number
evading
for
the
the
question.
foreign aid policy.
I don't
Vinny's
have
at
a
zero. The U.S. Senate is at 95. What number?
He's asking you what amount of aid you want to send. Like, you don't need to have like an exact number, but you can be like, yeah, I want to send some billions, or like at least indicate you want to send something or not something.
Where are you at?
Ukraine is the most resource rich and corrupt country.
It's not the most corrupt country. Every year it improves on the corruption index. I think last year it went up 2. Other years it's went up more. I think it's like middling on the corruption index now. It's like it's like almost halfway up. So, I mean, it's improved quite a lot over the last 8 to 10 years. A lot of because it's trying to go in with EU integration, which then shows why partially they want to integrate within the EU. And they're having to do a ton more corruption purges right now in order to get into the EU, integrate with the West more, fight the war more effectively. People getting fired, man. People getting arrested. And like people could say, oh, well, look at people getting fired and arrested. That's proof of corruption. Yes. But also, it's when people are getting fired and arrested that when you're dealing corruption. That's how you deal with corruption. So I think people are not giving the Ukrainians much credit. And the main people, while we talk about the West needs to make them fight corruption more, and I do think like it's always good for us to add a little pressure on that. At the end of the day, is Ukrainian corruption activists that have always fought the most and have died, literally died, with certain corruption activists literally being killed by, I think it was... Kuchma. Kuchma is accused of assassinating a journalist, having him chopped up and murdered just so he would cover up his corruption.
We could have given them support and give them things and give them arms and also have a way for them to pay it back and have them a way to participate in the solution.
So he says, so this is a loan now.
Do I have a spreadsheet to tell you?
But they will not be able to pay back enough. They will not be able to borrow enough to be able to pay it all back. They just wouldn't be able to. They need more than that. And that's why but the effects of them losing is going to be economically worse than what would be the effects if we were just to help them win the war. The worst economic effects from the war in Ukraine have already been felt. They were felt at the start of the war. They were felt with the energy crisis at the start. And now we have a much bigger LNG buyer in Europe. And economically, the effects of it for us are not that hard anymore. Honestly, it's countries that were heavily reliant on Ukraine as a grain importer are the ones that are potentially most at risk, probably from the direct economic implications of the war.
What I would do? How much would you do?
Tom, you're the biz doc. You probably do have a spreadsheet.
No, I don't. But I would take care of America first, and I would make a rational.
It's just not, man. It's 80 years. We're still on the same slogans. We have evolved the American foreign policy knowledge how much since 1930?
Let me ask you a question. Say he says $5 billion. Say he says $20 billion. What's your follow-up question? I'm actually curious what your follow-up question is.
I want to know if his number's zero is what I'm trying to get at. Is the number zero?
I just said it wasn't zero.
Yes, that's that. The loan thing is going to be coming up more. And now Lindsey Graham's even pushing the loan thing, but that has no chance of success, man. And plus, we got the aid at the gates of the House. We're not starting this process all over again. We're 120 days in. Get ridiculous. Getting ridiculous. But can Ukraine actually win the war? From first time chatter. Well, it depends on what supplies they have. It all depends on the conditions on the ground. Perseverance and supplies. Perseverance and supplies. Perseverance and supplies. That's how you win a modern attritional war. So if they don't have the supplies, if they don't have the ammunition, if they don't have the tanks, then no. If they do, then I think it's possible. But it also depends on that supply being consistent and continued improvement of the Ukrainian armed forces, both in a drone capacity, technological capacity, research capacity, and command capacity. But I think not only can the Ukrainians win the war, I think the Russians can lose it. It all depends on what we do, though. History is alive. See, I don't agree with the people that say that, oh, the Soviet Union couldn't beat the Afghans, but Russia has to beat Ukraine, supported by collectively like 30 plus countries. I don't believe that. If we really put our pedal to the metal, we could make them win. It's a question, I think, of political will.